The temples of ancient Egypt weren't just monuments. They were messages, etched in stone, left for those who knew how to read them. Some of those messages still defy explanation. Carvings of technology, symbols that don't belong, and stories far older than the pharaohs. Today we bring you 5 secrets hidden in the walls of ancient Egypt. 5. The helicopter hieroglyphs at Abydos. When Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, the world's attention was fixed on the treasures within. But one detail caught the eye of Polish Egyptologist and archaeologist Kazimierz Majewski. As he examined the burial chamber, his gaze fell upon 3 strange hieroglyphic carvings near the entrance. He recognized 2 of the symbols. One represented a beetle, the other, a flower. But the third, well, it was unlike anything he'd seen before. At first, he thought it might be a lotus bud, but the shape didn't match. Then he considered a water lily, but that didn't fit either. After careful observation, he came to a shocking conclusion. The carving wasn't a flower at all. It was a helicopter. This wasn't just any helicopter, though. It looked exactly like the modern Sikorsky helicopter. Not only did it have 2 propellers, but it also had a small cabin and 4 sets of control sticks, just like today's aircraft. So how could an ancient Egyptian carving depict a modern invention? There are 2 possible answers. First, ancient astronauts. This theory suggests that extraterrestrials visited Earth in the distant past, and some Egyptians may have witnessed these visits. They could have recorded these encounters in carvings, including one depicting a helicopter. Second, advanced ancient Egyptians. Mainstream Egyptology argues that ancient Egypt was more advanced than we realize. The Egyptians possessed knowledge of subjects such as astronomy and engineering that far surpassed their supposed level of development. This is evident in many areas of their civilization, including their architectural marvels and their understanding of the cosmos. If this is true, then the helicopter carving wouldn't be out of place. Instead, it would simply be another example of Egyptian ingenuity. However, there is no direct evidence to support either of these theories. The helicopter carving remains a mystery, leaving us to wonder about the true nature of ancient Egyptian civilization. For more on ancient mysteries, stay tuned. 4. The mysterious light bulb carving at Dendera. In 1881, a French engineer named Louis Bottineau was exploring the Temple of Hathor at Dendera when he noticed something unusual. On the ceiling of the temple, nestled among the hieroglyphics, was a carving that didn't seem to fit. At first glance, it looked like a simple flame emitting light, but upon closer inspection, it became clear that this was no ordinary flame. The carving depicted a bulbous object with 3 prongs extending from it, radiating light much like a modern light bulb. But how could ancient Egyptians have carved something so technologically advanced? According to mainstream Egyptology, the carving isn't a light bulb at all, but a lotus flower. This interpretation is based on the assumption that the 3 prongs are the petals of the flower, and the circular shape represents the center of the bloom. However, this explanation doesn't hold up under scrutiny. A lotus flower doesn't look like that. And what's more, the Egyptians had plenty of opportunities to carve flowers. They didn't need to make something so realistic only to misrepresent it as a flower. So is the carving really a light bulb? Possibly. But even if it is, that doesn't answer why the Egyptians carved it in the first place. Perhaps they were trying to depict a real light bulb. After all, ancient Egyptians were known for their advanced knowledge of electricity. They used devices like electromagnetics and electroplating, which required a good understanding of electrical currents. So maybe they observed natural phenomena like lightning and wondered how it worked. Maybe they experimented with generating electricity from sources like flowing water, and maybe they even created simple light bulbs using materials like copper and quartz. However, without more evidence, we can only speculate. The light bulb carving remains a tantalizing mystery, reminding us that ancient Egypt continues to hold many secrets. 3. The hidden star. Maps of the tombs. The tombs of ancient Egypt's pharaohs weren't just elaborate burial chambers. They were intricate puzzles. Many of these tombs were designed to teach those who solved them, like the famous one in the Valley of the Kings. To find the entrance, one needed to decipher cryptic clues and solve complex problems. But one of the most intriguing puzzles wasn't meant to hide the tomb. It was hiding in plain sight. In the middle of the floor was a star map. These maps, found in several tombs, showed the positions of stars and constellations as they would have appeared at specific times, possibly indicating significant astronomical events or serving as guides for the dead pharaoh's journey through the afterlife. But there was a problem. As the Earth rotates on its axis and revolves around the sun, the stars appear to move across the sky over time. So the star maps couldn't have been accurate representations of the night sky at any single point in history. It took researchers almost 100 years to understand why. In 1923, an American astronomer named F.N. Heiss took a closer look at the star maps and made a surprising discovery. Each map was accurate for a different time. The stars in each constellation were lined up perfectly, but they were lined up for different nights. This meant that the Egyptians hadn't carved a single star map onto the floor. They had carved many, each representing a different night in the sky. But how did they manage to map the stars so accurately? How did they keep track of the changing positions of the constellations? It turns out they had developed a sophisticated system of astronomy, complete with detailed observations and calculations. They tracked the paths of the stars and planets, noting their positions in relation to each other. They kept records of eclipses and other astronomical phenomena, and they passed this knowledge down to future generations through things like the star maps on the tomb floors. 2. Advanced mathematics in sacred geometry. Sacred geometry is the study of the shapes, patterns, and proportions that are considered to be aesthetically pleasing and meaningful. The ancient Egyptians were masters of sacred geometry. They used it to design their temples and pyramids, and they believed that these shapes and proportions reflected the order and harmony of the universe. One of the most famous examples of sacred geometry in ancient Egypt is the Great Pyramid of Giza. The pyramid has a square base and 4 equal sides, which represent the 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water. The angles of the pyramid represent the 4 cardinal directions, and the height of the pyramid represents the connection between earth and heaven. Another example is the Temple of Luxor, which features a number of geometric shapes and patterns that are designed to create a sense of harmony and balance. The temple's main entrance, for example, is framed by 2 massive pillars that are shaped like inverted pyramids. These inverted pyramids symbolize the union of the earthly and heavenly realms. The ancient Egyptians used sacred geometry not only in their architecture, but also in their everyday life. They believed that the universe was governed by mathematical laws, and that these laws could be used to predict and control human destiny. For example, they kept track of the seasons and the cycles of the moon, and used this knowledge to plan their crops and festivals. They also believed that certain geometric shapes and patterns had magical properties, and used them in amulets and other objects of religious significance. 1. References to Zep-Tepi. Zep-Tepi means the first time in ancient Egyptian. It was the mythical beginning of the world as the Egyptians saw it. It was a time of great floods, which eventually receded to reveal a new fertile land. And it was at this time that humanity began. But Zep-Tepi might have been more than just a myth. Recent research suggests that there really was a great flood in the region around 12,000 years ago, and that this event may have inspired the Egyptians' creation story. If this is true, then references to Zep-Tepi can be found throughout Egyptian history, including in the walls of their tombs. In the tomb of an ancient Egyptian nobleman named Ti, for example, there is a carving that depicts the biblical story of Noah's Ark. The Egyptians must have heard about this story from the Israelites who lived nearby, and they incorporated it into their own mythology. This shows that the ancient Egyptians weren't just superstitious people who believed in anything. They were selective about what they believed, and they only accepted stories that they could reconcile with their own culture and history. But perhaps the most compelling evidence of Zep-Tepi can be found in the ruins of a city near Cairo. The city dates back to around 6,000 years ago, and it contains a number of structures that resemble those found in ancient Mesopotamia. The Egyptians had no written language at this time, but researchers believe that they were influenced by the Mesopotamians and that they adopted their writing system as well as their myths and legends. This suggests that the ancient Egyptians were open to new ideas and that they were willing to learn from other cultures. However, this view contradicts the traditional narrative of ancient Egypt as an isolated civilization. Most historians argue that ancient Egypt developed independently from other civilizations and that it was largely self-sufficient. However, the evidence found in the ruins near Cairo suggests otherwise. The Egyptians weren't afraid to learn from other cultures, and they weren't afraid to change their beliefs and practices accordingly. Were these symbols meant for the future, or are they evidence of a forgotten past? One thing is clear. Ancient Egypt left behind more than history. It left riddles carved in stone. Thanks for watching. What do you think is the most interesting fact about ancient Egypt? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more echoes of the past. Until next time.